ahead and get started. So Morgan, will you please kick us off with the prayer and pledge?
Absolutely. So if you guys just want to take a second to center yourselves in any way you see fit, we will get started with prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me show love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, not so much to be understood as to understand, not so much to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we awake to eternal life. Amen. And then I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you so much, Morgan. So today we have our wonderful DPEs who are coming to speak to us about what it means to be anti-racist and how we can best be allies. So Nina, if you would like to just get started, feel free. I know that Annie is working on those breakout rooms for you.
Perfect, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so we are the DPEs coming to you to provide you with some information. First, I would like to talk about our mission and vision. As DPEs, our mission is to be a program that develops and brings together student leaders from diverse backgrounds and experiences to drive social justice education and intergroup relations through peer-to-peer workshops, using activities that explore intra and interpersonal identities, group dynamics, and power and privilege. We like to put on different events that bring awareness to certain topics that are relevant at the time and are important for people to know about. Our vision as DPs is to shape the campus environment to understand and promote diversity and inclusion, build stronger relationships within our community and peers, and contribute to the development of each student's initiative and position in creating an equitable campus and world. Basically, we want to bring awareness to different topics, like I said. We have some expectations for this session, which are very important. The first one is this is a safe space. And for this session to be effective, you must be an active participant and stay engaged. Please keep an open mind and be mindful of your own airtime. Also encourage others to share and speak, and feel free to share what you are comfortable with sharing. And most importantly, please be considerate and respectful. First, we're going to start off with the definition of racism, which is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. The definition of anti-racism is explicitly taking race into account in order to disrupt racialized hierarchies for the sake of promoting social justice and respect for human dignity. To become anti-racism, it causes to actively promote social justice by engaging in difficult conversations, such as what we're going to do today, challenging assumptions about how our organization functions, and disrupting existing policies and practices. How we can work towards anti-racism, there's a couple things. First, you can engage in difficult conversations, such as today, even if it may be uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable and discomfort needs to be acknowledged and leaned into to get anywhere first. Next, you can examine best practices and existing resources, such as watching documentaries, reading books, things like that. Next is disrupt existing policies and practices, and an important thing to remember about this is that it cannot be just adding people of color for diversity. It is challenging assumptions about the organization's functions, such as who is in charge of recruiting and hiring, who is in the room when decisions were being made, and how are people evaluated and promoted. Another very big important thing to remember is everyone must take responsibility for action. This cannot fall on certain departments or on the underrepresented group. Systematic racism is evident in hateful and violent behavior towards people of color and in normalized policies and practices that lead to an inequitable outcome for people based on racial identity. Sometimes these inequalities are not driven by a desire to discriminate, but unconscious biases that people have developed over their lifetime, which we will speak about today. The cumulative effects of systematic racism in both small and big ways gives different people access to opportunities. For example, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 pandemic on people of color is a direct outcome of systematic racism. And how do we disrupt and dismantle systematic racism? Before we can dismantle systems of racism, everyone needs to understand three basic things. You have to have an understanding of its origins. You have to have an understanding of how it has operated over time. And then finally have an understanding of the profound and violent impact it continues to have in people's lives today.
So we're gonna learn more about microaggressions and how it ties in with racism. So before we start the video, I would like to give an example just so everybody could have a little more of an insight as to what microaggressions are. So personally, I had a microaggression done to me towards the beginning of the school year, my first semester, when I talked about it was being Mexican Independence Day towards one of my teachers, and then my teacher ended up saying if it wasn't for COVID, I would be celebrating with margaritas and Taco Tuesday. And although she did not mean it like that, which we will hear that phrase a little later, it was a bit offensive to say that it all dials or boils down to those simple stereotypes of being Mexican. So now we will play the video.
You're so well spoken.
Are you sure you're Filipino?
How are you educated if you're from Africa?
Is your English really that good?
So where are you really from?
My name is Ahmed. I am 26 years old. And I'm an undergraduate student at Yale. I study international relations with philosophy. So certain examples of microaggressions I've experienced in the past include the typical ones that you hear of, people asking you where you're really from. I mean, I grew up in Northampton when I used to live in the UK, and that's the initial answer I give, and then I'm asked, no, but where are you really from? That's something you typically get.
So my name's Ade, and I'm 20, turning 21 in June, and I study international relations, and I'm in my second year. Microaggression usually comes as an insult or invalidation. So you either get insults that are sort of wrapped up in compliments where they associate characteristics that they like about you with whiteness. So, oh, you're so well spoken, or I can't believe you got here, at university at that point.
My name is Zahira. I'm 19 and I'm a politics student. One example of microaggression I've experienced in the past is I've been on the bus and it'll be a packed bus to the point everyone's standing, but no one will sit next to me because they see me wearing a scarf and they see me like a terrorist or an unfriendly person despite me smiling and just being like everyone else.
So how microaggressions feel in comparison to overt racism? In a way, you know how to deal with it better, because while obviously it's usually more aggressive, it's usually more directed, and in that sense, it's a horrible feeling, but you can address it very directly. But with microaggressions, it's difficult because while it's less aggressive, there's also much less you can do about it. It's much harder to convince people that it happens or that it exists.
In university, especially coming from London, which is relatively more diverse, you find yourself in a situation many times for the first time being in an environment where you're the only person of color. Even in classrooms, even in seminars, you have situations where you're trying to talk and it's like, oh, well, I don't understand how race plays into an issue, so and so and so, when how could you understand when you're not in my position, when you're not open to understanding in the first place?
I've experienced microaggressions at uni, and it makes me feel more upset because it's more so among the students who I think would be more so my friends and be more liberal and more understanding. I would know to like not stereotype me or like be subtly racist, but instead they do and say stuff. I have good English, even though it's like one of my first languages.
I think microaggressions do have a long-term effect on things like mental health.
Before I experienced any racism and actually lived like in a bubble, you could say, I was perfectly fine. I was confident. But because of all the microaggressions and stereotypes I've faced since wearing a hijab, it's caused me to develop anxiety, and I feel really anxious going into new spaces.
I've been fortunate. I have friends who have gone through similar situations and that's helped. But you find a lot of the times, a lot of people don't, they often feel isolated or they can very easily start questioning themselves and their self-esteem can go down.
The reason it particularly affects mental health is because mental health professionals, a lot of them might not recognize that they exist, and therefore it's difficult to feed into the kind of the therapeutic process, I believe.
I don't think there's any straightforward solution to stop microaggression. I think it starts with education. So people learning why it's not acceptable to say certain things, why people might get offended by certain things. And as microaggressions often played off as banter, why that's not okay. Also having support systems and procedures in institutions that help people report the problem and take the problem seriously.
I think a solution to this is just like we taught about racism in class and how to stand up if you see racism. We should also be taught about microaggressions and like to stand up for microaggressions and that they are real. And it's not political correctness, it's just not being rude or horrible.
I think there are solutions to stop microaggressions within society. I think the solutions comprise mainly of how we've typically abolished other forms of discrimination historically, which is the work of activists to engage in campaigns, to write about it, to protest about it, to campaign. What I think is most important is listen to people of color and just take it on board.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about microaggressions after the video. And a phrase that is used a lot of times when somebody is giving a microaggression or trying to say them is they say, oh, I didn't mean it like that. And so that's kind of like the phrase that we titled our DPE chat with it, and something that we kind of keep in mind. So we're going to go over the definition of a microaggression is a subtle, often unintentional form of prejudice. So rather than an overt declaration of racism or sexism, a microaggression is often takes the shape of like an offhand comment, an inadvertently painful joke, or a pointed insult. So microaggressions seemingly are like the product of one's own implicit biases. Like we all have our own implicit bias, but microaggressions tend to arise when someone has certain like racial or sexist biases that they don't realize. Addressing and calling out microaggressions has been categorized as like being overly sensitive. I've also heard people say like, oh, you're just trying to be politically correct, or that's not offensive, I was just joking. And so like things like that, saying like, I didn't mean it like that, it really that person kind of really feels like whether it's questioning, is it real or not? And like kind of mentioned in the video, it does kind of make it harder to address as well as like get better from there. So one way to like kind of combat this, make sure you're not giving microaggressions, is to be like conscious of the words you say to others and think before you speak. It's definitely something that everyone has said since like middle school, but it still holds shape in college and in real life when you think about how your words affect other people, or why you're saying that, or is there a reason why you're saying it to this person opposed to another person, and things like that are questions that you can ask yourself to make sure that you don't give microaggressions to others. Another thing to keep in mind is that only the person who the microaggression is directed to can decide what is and is not offensive. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, whether as an ally or someone who's receiving a microaggression. It's up to that person to decide whether or not it's offensive. And so you don't want people jumping to conclusions or trying to defend something that actually is hurtful to somebody.
So next we're going to talk about exploring implicit bias. So the general definition of implicit bias is when we have attitudes towards people or associate stereotypes with them without our unconscious knowledge. So it's often unconscious. We all have biases about things originating from like society norms, like what you should wear, or gender stereotypes or racial stereotypes, and also social media. It's really important to know that it's not to shame yourself for having these biases, because we all have them, but it's really important to acknowledge them and not judge a book by its cover.
The difference between implicit and explicit biases, or implicit bias, well, is that implicit biases are the ones that we don't really think about all the time. Like, to give an example, kind of a neutral example, say I went for a walk one day and a person with very large feet steps on my feet. Now I'm really uncomfortable walking next to people with big feet. It's not a problem that I am avoiding them. I'm not really noticing that I'm doing it. It's just an implicit thing. It's something secretive. The problem is not that that the person stepped on my foot. It was an accident to begin with. So now we're just working through, and we have these biases about things, and we're working. The point of implicit biases is that we have to work through these things. We should call out the behavior of those things and not the people. The biases are bad and not the people who commit them.
Also here, exploring more implicit versus explicit bias, like the cultural iceberg. So things that are above the surface would be explicit, things we can see. Like we can see somebody's kind of food they eat, we can see people's languages, we can see what they wear. But things that are implicit that we don't necessarily think about, but are always in the back of our minds and influence how we think, could be like gender codes or humor or gestures that people might have. And also it's important to know that implicit bias does work in a cycle that leads to structural racism, beginning with associations and assumptions that we see on newspapers or television or social media, that further translates to like history and policies. For example, different crime bills or different policy reform that are designed to increase those biases. And lastly, contribute to structural racism, which be inequitable outcomes for like housing desegregation or discrimination in the criminal justice system. We see this today in college campuses. Some people have biases about different races and ethnicities on their knowledge level, being able-bodied. Majority of people are able-bodied, but knowing that some people are not able-bodied, it's not always physical that you're able to see. It can also be mental and intellectual as well. And also people's sexual orientation is also a bias that people may have.
So next, my colleague Sama and I are going to be presenting on white privilege and different privileges that people can obtain and have and are just kind of born into. So we are going to first take a second to watch the video and then explain a little bit more about privilege and white privilege.
How do you feel when you see a headline like this? Or this? If you're white, you might feel uncomfortable, guilty, or even angry. In this video, we're going to talk about why that happens and how to overcome it. Most white Americans don't realize our culture protects us from having to truly confront racial inequality, which gives us a major blind spot when it comes to understanding what the reality of systemic racism is for people of color, or how complicit we may be in their oppression. We think of racism as something bad people engage in, instead of something we're conditioned into from childhood. As a result, when indirect, unconscious, or less obvious forms of racism and discrimination are exposed for what they are, it challenges our beliefs about ourselves and our world, provoking our own blind spots when it comes to race. And more often than not, well, let's just say we don't handle it well. The phrase was invented by Robin DiAngelo, a multicultural education expert, to talk about what happens consciously and unconsciously when white Americans are confronted with challenges to white dominance. According to DiAngelo, even a minimal amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves, including the outward display of emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and leaving the stress-inducing situation. These behaviors wind up preserving the status quo, protecting white comfort, and therefore reinstating white dominance. White fragility is triggered by interruptions, in which white codes of discourse are broken to force a white person to confront racism, and they show up in a number of different ways. Like when anyone, white or otherwise, suggests that a white person's viewpoint is racist. When people of color talk candidly about their experiences of racism. When people of color choose not to share stories or answer questions about their racial experience. And especially whenever people of color choose not to protect the racial feelings of white people. Some other instances of racial stress include when white people are denied access to Black safe spaces or Black bodies. When white people are told their actions have racist impacts. When racial inclusivity gets prioritized over group membership. When double standards are exposed. When white meritocracy is challenged by exposing white privilege. Whenever white centrality is challenged by narratives in which people of color are front and center without being presented stereotypically. And finally, when a person of color holds a position of leadership. Whatever the cause, knee-jerk overreactions protect white dominance by silencing non-white voices and segregating whites from people of color. By distancing ourselves from racially stressful situations and refusing to consider other perspectives, white people take advantage of the very race privilege we claim not to have. As long as white people require conversations about race to be comfortable for us, racial equality will be a lot harder to achieve. So what do we do when our rules stand in the way of dealing constructively with racism? The answer is, we break the rules. The best way to defeat white fragility is to grow a thicker skin. Build your racial stamina by following some do's and don'ts. Don't assume you are objective or an authority on the experiences of people of color. In a racialized society, whites inevitably have a blind spot. Resist the urge to get defensive when people of color speak honestly about their experiences. Catch yourself whenever you find yourself thinking that a Black person's perspective is divisive or abusive. That's often a sign that you lack understanding. Don't recenter a conversation or narrative involving race around you or your feelings. Instead, cede the floor to your neighbors of color to amplify and learn from their perspectives. Explore the complexity of individuals you disagree with or don't understand. Your realities are totally different, and you will never breach that divide by running away from or silencing uncomfortable exchanges. Before getting angry, think about the root cause or need behind someone's emotional outburst or complaint. What you're interpreting as impoliteness or vitriol may be the best available means for them to express their experience of racism. Remember, in this society, white people are safer, included, and seen by default. The same is not true for people of color, which is why forcing them to shoulder the burden of fighting for equality, requiring them to be friendly and helpful in the face of white ignorance, and expecting them to give white people the benefit of the doubt is not only wrong, but also makes well-meaning white people complicit in their oppression. Choosing not to be sensitive in a world that already shelters you will improve your racial resiliency, lead to better relationships with your Black and brown friends and neighbors, and most importantly, create necessary space for the equality and justice that people of color deserve.
All right, I hope everyone enjoyed the video and was able to see the message behind it in terms of white privilege and being able to overcome white fragility. Right now, we're going to be taking a white privilege test. Basically, you just have to record the amount of times you're saying yes to these 15 questions in your head. And keep in mind, the more yeses that you're answering, the more privilege that you have. And hopefully this test will be able to open your eyes to the amount of privilege you have as a white person. So I'll go ahead and start with the first one. Did your ancestors most likely come to the US through Ellis Island?
Did you study the culture of your ancestors in elementary school?
Did your family have more than one car growing up?
Did your family own the house that you grew up in?
Do your parents have a college degree?
Did you grow up with both parents in your household?
Do you feel protected by law enforcement?
Did you grow up with at least 50 books in your household?
Did you grow up with access to private tutoring?
Do you have access to bandages that are your skin tone?
Did you struggle to pay for your education?
Was your first job in high school?
Did you attend a public or private high school?
Are the majority of the clothes you own brand names?
And finally, did you have to help your parents out financially by getting a job? So I just want you guys to keep in mind how many yeses you said to these 15 questions, and keep in mind how much power that holds for you to be able to experience all of these things with the privilege that's given to you. All right, so white privilege. There are various forms of privilege beyond race. So beyond just white privilege, there's many forms, especially in terms of ability. Being physically healthy and able-bodied, that's a privilege. Being financially well off, that's a privilege. There's gender privilege, sexuality privilege, and all sorts of other privileges. It's important to never assume someone's privilege. You should be open to change, diversity, and complexity. Everyone is different, and differences in opinions/perspectives will always be an issue. Just make sure to use your voice to help others and use that privilege given to you since birth for the good of your own community. A lot of the times, privilege is seen as a bad thing, but if you see it and turn it around to this is a tool in my toolbox to be able to help those who don't have the same privilege that I was born with, then you can use that for the better. And then don't stay silent or leave situations where you can see yourself as a tool to be able to help those less fortunate than you. And don't use yourself to explain racism. Use other story to amplify. Make sure you're aware of the way that society works and how it may affect others who do not hold your privilege, and just being mentally and physically aware of your privilege and where you stand in society to be able to help those who are below you.
So how you can use your privilege. I'm just going to kind of do a little general overview as my colleague Selma said. So having white privilege isn't a bad thing if you use it correctly, helping out others who may not have the same privileges or are oppressed. Use your voice to help others. So using any privilege given to you for the good of your community. This can be in just being an advocate for policy changes, or even just finding ways to help others who do not have the same privileges as you. So just use your privileges to help others around you. And then don't stay silent or leave the situation. And these last two kind of go together. So don't use yourself to explain racism either. So don't stay silent and leave the situation, because you could be in the position to help someone else, and use other stories to amplify what you are trying to get across. As seen in the video, it can be uncomfortable to share and also emotionally charged to try to share. So use examples such as news stories or other stories that are widely known by the people or the community you are speaking to.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to become an ally. So an ally is typically a member of advantaged social groups who uses social power to take a stand against social injustice directed at specific targeted groups. An ally works to be an agent of social change rather than an agent of oppression. Then there's a term called ally accountability, in which they explore ways to be actively involved in allyship and ways to use their strengths, set goals, and look for resources instead of succumb to what the general community does and engage in oppression. So we can use our privilege to stand up for what is right and seek out those resources to be an advocate for the groups that need it.
Some examples on how to become an ally are: don't laugh something off if it isn't right, use your privilege as a way to educate others, get comfortable being uncomfortable and having uncomfortable conversations, and this can range from larger conversations to even things in small talk. Also learn from your and others' mistakes. Always remember silence is betrayal, as well as speak up, not over. And then lastly, something to reflect on can be other ways you can work on to become a better ally.
Okay, so we're gonna go into breakout rooms.
So are you going to tell them what they're doing in breakout rooms ahead of time, or do you want me to send them now and you're going to put something in the chat? Oh, you've got facilitators in the rooms, right? Okay, I'll send everyone now.
Thank you. Okay, I think that everyone's back. We're gonna have a couple questions for big group discussion. First, I would like one or two people to answer the first question. What is one thing you learned from this presentation?
For me, it kind of just widened like how I see the issue. It can be very vague. It can be something like you're not even know that you're doing, or it's something like how you think about it, versus very specific, like if you're walking outside alone at night, or I know someone else in our group talked about like when they feel most comfortable in like a specific club on campus. I took a more vague and broad definition to that, so it kind of just gave me a new view on how specific and how big of an issue it is.
Yes, thank you. Can I get one other person?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I mentioned this in my group, but one thing that I really learned from this presentation was that becoming anti-racism is a commitment, and it is a lifelong commitment. So for example, if you have any like implicit biases that you may have learned from your parents, grandparents, growing up, whatever it might be, like it's going to take work to overcome that. And it's going to take a lot of, time maybe even to overcome that, but it's something that needs to still be done.
Yes, thank you guys for sharing. The second question is, how did this session change or strengthen your perspective on these issues? Can I also get another 2 people to answer, please?
Yeah, I'll go. So I would say it definitely strengthened my perspective on implicit bias specifically. I mentioned it in our breakout room with Sama. I specifically talked about how the area I'm from, it's rural Ohio, and I went to a public high school. It was like 95% white, like I said earlier. And so like talk on race is not something that really happens like when there isn't any real difference in race where you're from. So when I came to college, I actually started talking about these things and hearing about these things. And so it's definitely like the talks that I've had like this have strengthened my understanding of the issues like implicit bias. So.
Thank you. Can I get one other person?
I mean, I can probably just say kind of that I realized how small a microaggression can really be and like how big its impacts are. So for me, microaggression, before talking with you guys and like that breakout session, microaggression was like, oh, maybe someone says something, you know, that just doesn't make you feel very comfortable. And honestly, relative to microaggressions, sort of what I've come to understand is that relative to other microaggressions, that's pretty big. You know, like a microaggression can be literally a facial expression in response to something someone says. And like the impacts of that over time manifest in enormous ways, you know, in someone's mind. And because of how small the aggression is and how large the result is, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just a big deal. So that kind of changed my lens on it a little bit. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's definitely important to remember that what may seem small to you could be a big deal to someone else. And then the last question is, how do you plan to now take this information and act upon it based on your position?
I can go. I think for me, it's all about, you know, making sure you're more intentional about your thoughts and what you're saying, and ensuring that you're educated and understand that what you say impacts others, even though you don't think it does. So I think making sure that when you're with a group of friends or in the classroom setting or anything along those lines, is making sure that you are being more self-aware and understand what you're saying or what others are saying. And I think the next thing that you know, what else you could do is just really make sure that you're stepping up and being an ally and understanding that when you hear something wrong with that, like, don't just let it slide by. Make sure you stand up and say something and like correct it when you hear it, because if you don't, then no one will ever, you know, learn that what they're saying is impacting others in a negative way. And so making sure that you can kind of curb and educate them on what they said and why they said it, you know, and why what they said was incorrect or how it could affect others.
Based on my position in SGA as a first class representative, I probably for the SGA chat, knowing what I know now, I know a lot more, and I think I'm a lot more educated. So I would probably try and phrase and add in a couple questions that I'd come up with on my own, and include that in the SGA chat. So I definitely would, and hopefully I will next year.
If I could say, probably for me, I think this session is really useful because it gives you sort of an overview of the problem, you know, so thinking about like what a microaggression is, what implicit bias is, what macroaggressions are, that kind of thing. Understanding the problem is a big part of that, but then also having an extended dialogue about how to intervene in situations where this happens. So I feel like someone gets upset by something, how do you recognize that? And then how do you act on it appropriately? And for me, I'm working pretty hard with Luis Rogel on this right now, just developing an in-depth training on the intervention part of recognizing and intervening in racial bias in situations where people feel uncomfortable. And Luis, I'm sure he has more to say about that, but that's something that I'm working on right now in my position to act upon these issues.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for sharing. Is there any questions / feedback for us?
I definitely want to say thank you for coming. I know that there's definitely like whether it was everyone or just some people, I know that there was a lot of value in the presentation that y'all had today, and a lot of people took away a lot of things that they should use. So I just really want to say thank you, because like I learned something, and I know everyone else did too.
Yes, I want to thank you guys so much for coming. It's definitely extremely valuable. I think like there's definitely a lot of work and a lot of growth that needs to be done within SGAs and in SGA, and kind of realizing that maybe we say or do certain things that don't make our Senate or our meetings the safest place for students of colors or people who share other different kinds of identities and other intersectionalities. And so really having this presentation and kind of putting words to the way that minority students are feeling is something very vital and very important. I know I learned a lot of things, so I hope everybody had just as big of a takeaway as I did, because a lot of the stuff that is in the presentation is a lot of things that other students have experienced, not just on campus, but also within our own senates, our classrooms, our campus, everything. So I just think this is a very big takeaway and very important. So thank you so much, DPE. I really appreciate it.
Okay, if there's no one else, I would like to end on this quote by President Spina. It says, "To be fully human, we must embrace multiple perspectives and look at the world through the eyes of people who are different from us to grow in our own knowledge, empathy, and humanity." And then here are also our social medias and ways to contact us. If you're interested in becoming a DPE, applications will go out next semester. Thank you guys so much for having us.
Thank you so much, DPEs, for coming and taking time out of your weekend and your Sunday evening to be here to speak with us. I know that I really appreciate it and learned a lot, and the same can be said for everyone else within SGA. So we all really appreciate it and hope you have a great week.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Michael, do we have any request presentations tonight?
No, we don't.
All right, Grant, will you go ahead and do the attendance?
Yep. Barat Ali,
Here.
James Brill,
Here.
Jada Brown,
Here.
Jules Carr-Chelman,
Present.
Natalie Coppolino,
Here.
Morgan Cox,
Here.
Lillian Dickman,
Here.
Michael Fields,
Here.
Sofia Garcia,
Here.
Jessica Garvin,
Present.
Mason Gordon,
Here.
Dan Hennessy,
Present.
Courtney Henthorn,
Here.
Thank you. Hannah Hobie,
Here.
Jake Jagels,
In attendance.
Bridget Mooney,
Here.
Drew Moyer,
Alive and breathing, Grant.
glad to hear it. Sorry, there's Ryan Pearson, Ryan, Annie Philbin,
Here.
Grace Perucci, Tommy Reese,
Here.
Luis Rogel,
I'm here.
Jack Santee,
Here.
Kelly Stewart,
Here.
Ben Thomas,
Here.
Jacob Troutwine,
Here.
Rachel Veneman, Rachel. Okay, and Alec Warren.
Here.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks, Grant. Do we have any public announcements tonight? Okay, seeing none, do we have any public comments and concerns? Chris, I know that you were on there first, so.
All right, I just had, first I want to thank you all for engaging with the DPEs. That was a really great workshop. I have a couple of comments on a couple of resolutions for tonight. So starting with resolution 23 around smoking and vaping huts. I would really encourage the Senate to consider whether or not the administration has been engaged in this topic. So I know there have been ongoing smoking committees that have taken us from a smoking campus to our current model. And I'm curious as to if the particularly cultural implications of this legislation have been considered. I know that a lot of the smokers that we do see on campus are international students and employees from low SES backgrounds. So I'm certainly not saying that I disagree with the notion of the bill. I'm just curious as to whether the university has been engaged in any way before we demand that they take action. Similarly, I suppose, is Senate Resolution 24 around Irish American Heritage Month. First, I'm frankly just incredibly suspect of the timing of this, particularly given the actions of so many students on campus yesterday who would probably argue that they were celebrating Irish heritage when certainly folks in Ireland would not agree, as well as the timing. So Irish American Heritage Month is in March. And so I'm curious as to why, if this is a really important piece for the Senate, why it wasn't brought up in late February or early March. There's call for programming, and I haven't seen any of that from the student government. And I am unaware of any conversations related to Irish American Heritage Month with the Cultural Programming Committee. So again, asking the university to engage in this programming. I'm curious if you've met with Merida and her staff that oversee cultural heritage programming, and also calling attention to other heritage months that we've also missed and that might be coming up, and making sure that we're looking at those as well. But my primary concern with this is, after the behaviors of yesterday, what kind of message this sends to the campus. And so with that, I hope that there are some conversations on the Senate floor about these bills, and I give you back my time, Natalie.
Thanks, Chris. Does anyone else have a public comment or concern? I don't think anyone else has signed up on the sheet, so feel free to just unmute yourself.
Ben has one in the chat, if you want to read it.
Yeah, I just saw that. I have not heard anything. I have no idea.
I feel like we should talk about yesterday. I feel like it's a very big elephant in the room. I don't know if that's just me. I definitely have my opinions on St. Patrick's Day, but I just feel like this is something we should talk about because yesterday was like a very big thing, especially if you like work in housing. Like you understand like how big yesterday was, like extremely detrimental. Honestly, like from a housing perspective, it was like close. Sorry, I'm at work. It was like close to like a worst case scenario for me in a way, especially in regards to maybe like opportunities of in-person graduation, getting sent home, you know, finding housing to be at. If we do get sent home, the possibility of public health shutting the university down, there are just a lot of different things that could uprise from yesterday. And I feel like that's something that's very important for us to address with the positions that we're in. You know, Chris does bring up a good point about like Irish Heritage Month, because I don't know, I know we brought up Black History Month because I wrote the legislation, but I mean, like, I don't remember us acknowledging Asian American Pacific Islander Month. I don't remember us acknowledging Native American Heritage Month. I really don't remember even if we acknowledged Hispanic Latinx History Month. I know that was in October. I don't recall us, I could be remembering, but I do think it's very concerned that like this is coming to the forefront of our legislation when we've been lacking of recognizing those months, period. And especially in regards to, I think, the intention of why that bill is being written.
I want to briefly respond to something Jada said about public health sending UD students all home. They're not going to want to do that if there's any potential that people have been exposed. What they might do is what we've seen happen at other colleges and universities, and that is isolating everybody on the campus, that you cannot leave your room. We have seen shutdowns happen. You've seen it at other schools, and that is absolutely a possibility here, that they will say, you are closed off in your rooms, the end, until we pass a 10 or 14 day period. So that is a very real possibility from public health.
This is really the only thing that I'm going to say about this topic, just because I sent messages in SGA chats yesterday encouraging people to be responsible and mindful of their actions. But going forward, please realize that your behaviors and your actions are a reflection of, not only you individually, but you as students at the university as well as SGA. So please remember to be respectful and very mindful of things that you are partaking in, because I know for sure of some individuals who were not, and those individuals are in SGA. And I'm very disappointed that they were going directly against university policy. There are ways to have fun and ways to have, safe, COVID conscious celebrations without acting like that. So that's really all I'm going to say on the topic. Was there any other public comments or concerns?
I just want to say this because I feel like I need to get this off my chest a little bit, because I think it relates to a little bit of what we talked about in DPE, like with the DPEs just now. Like, I think the way that a lot of students of color feel, and personally how I feel, is that like there's definitely a certain type of privilege that comes with not being afraid to celebrate St. Patrick's Day like that, and not being afraid to do whatever the festivities were yesterday. The past 3 years I've been at UD, I've been to multiple like cookouts during like Black cookouts, Black predominantly cookouts with students of color, at the Batu House, at the AKA House, at the Kappa House. And I think like 7 out of 10 times that students of color have a cookout on a completely different like environment, no drinking, that we are always approached by the police and public safety in some way, shape, or form, and it always has a negative connotation to it. And so a lot of students of color feel like, excuse my language, there's no way in hell that we would have been able to turn up like that. Like, I feel that, and this is something that's often recognized by not higher ups in MEC community, but MEC staff as well, that like if students of color were participating in the same behavior, in the same manner that our white counterparts were yesterday, that should, oh, let me not cuss, that would have been shut down automatically, that there really would have been no leeway for us. And, you know, you can argue of whether that's a fact or whether that's fiction or whether our public safety is like that. You can argue that all you want, but a lot of students of colors really feel like there is no leeway for us to participate in that kind of behavior. And so obviously everybody here is adults. You can do whatever you want. You can party whatever you want. You can choose what rules, guidelines you follow, whatever. That's not really the point, but I do think it is really important to highlight that there is a kind of privilege that comes with not being afraid to do something like that. And I think that really correlates to what we were just talking about with DPE. And I think this is a really important, like, kind of mirror reflection moment, because a lot of students of color felt that way. I feel that way personally. I work for housing and I didn't even get a chance to even go near what was happening. And I really feel that if I did, then there would have been a lot of consequences for me in relation to maybe some other people. So that's just something that I personally wanted to get off my chest. Yeah, I think that's just something that relates to what we were just talking about.
So I'll just speak really briefly. So that bill was actually written prior to everything involving St. Patrick's and even prior to this week. The only thing is, because of the issues involving the SGA drive, it hadn't actually been added to it, just the same way as some of those other bills. Nothing really got like added, right? So the timing of this is super unfortunate, and it's also really, I mean, I'm not discounting anything that happened on Saturday. It had nothing to do with that, and the impacts of that are honestly more substantial than this bill even existing. And I would withdraw it. I'm withdrawing it immediately. And I wanted to say that a lot earlier too, that it just somehow got added to it today, and it was not, after yesterday, it shouldn't have been added at all. Anyway, yes.
All right, thank you, Jada, and thank you, Jacob. Do we have any other comments or concerns? All right, seeing none, do we have any SGA members who would like to give a report?
Yeah, I'd just like to speak briefly before we get on the floor. So there are bylaws and constitutional changes proposed for today's Senate. So they largely pertain to adding the position of head of commuter relations to Senate in the voting capacity. So Courtney Henthorn would be a voting member of Senate after the both of these are passed, and presumably the student body passes when it comes time for the spring election. Yeah, Jagels.
Can you add a change to the bylaws change that make it conditional upon the constitutional change passes? Because otherwise we'd have bylaws out of step with Constitution if the constitutional change doesn't pass.
Yeah, my plan was just to overlook it until, because it'll only be like 4 days. But I can do that if you want to send me the specific language. does anyone have any questions before we get onto that? I just wanted to say that and then say I'd like to have these two done before we get to the 2 remaining resolutions for the night.
All right, thanks, Mason. Did we have any questions for Mason? All right, do we have any other public comments or sorry, any other SGA members that want to give a report?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Mike.
got-
Oh yeah, actually go ahead, Luis. That's fine.
All right. So I first wanted to say, so one of my company members, she is having an allyship event on Tuesday, March 30th, which is next week at 6 p.m. It's going to be on Zoom. And it's just basically talking about how to be an ally, right? You might not identify with the group, but that doesn't mean that you can't help them out, right? Or support them, right? So it's really important to know how to be an ally. So that's going on next week, Tuesday at 6 p.m. So hopefully y'all are there, especially with the DPE coming in today. I really hope that y'all see how important it is to be an ally. And then with that, maybe this is what Jules is going to say, but me and Jules are continuing to make progress on our turning bystanders into upstanders intervention training. We had a meeting with Kristen Keene, who overlooks the Green Dot training, and we had an amazing meeting with her. She gave us a lot of great feedback. And yeah, I mean, we're still doing a lot more research and we're trying to develop our program. Our goal is to like finish the layout of the program by the end of the semester and then hopefully have it start the beginning of next semester. Because this does take a long time. This isn't just a 30-minute, 45-minute training, but this is like in total going to be, you know, like close to like a 5-hour training, like kind of like what Green Dot is, right? And especially this is an important topic too, like how to be anti-racist and how to intervene in those type of situations is a really critical training, right? So yeah, and then Jules, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, not a lot, just that the meeting with Kristen Keene was awesome because she's in full support of what we're working on. And it's just really, really nice to hear from now. We've got 3 or 4 people that are staff, faculty, or administration at UD that are fully supportive of this advocacy project. So it's seeming like this is going to be an important thing that we're working on.
All right, thanks, Jules and Luis. Does anyone else have a report they would like to give?
Sorry, I forgot to reply to Drew about something and I need help with it. So I think it was last week, maybe the week before, there was legislation passed about voting records. Just want to put out there that I've not been given any instructions on anything other than to remove things when they're posted. So if one of the sponsors of that bill wants to set up a meeting where we can figure out who's responsible for things, we can enact that. But to my knowledge, nothing has been done with that bill. So Drew, sorry, I forgot to reply. And if someone sponsored that bill wants to set up a meeting, that'd be great.
Thanks, Chris. Do we have anyone else who would like to give a report tonight? All right, seeing none, I'll just jump into mine. So Tuesday night is the President's Forum, and that's usually when we would have our anti-racism working group meeting. So I'm looking at times to reschedule that meeting for next week, probably later in the week, possibly Friday afternoon, like we had to do a couple of weeks ago. But I will let everybody know in that working group chat what the deal is soon. Additionally, if you are interested in getting an SGA shirt, they're in the office, so please feel free to swing by there and pick up a shirt. But that is all I have. Jake, would you like to kick off the Senate floor?
Wait, Nat, I'm sorry if I could just ask, do we have to pay at all for those shirts or do we just?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep, you're good. All right, Jake.
Thank you, President Cupolino. The time is 7:19 p.m. I hereby call Senate floor to order. Mr. Secretary, will you please call the roll of voting members?
Barat Ali,
Here.
James Brill,
Here.
Jada Brown,
Yep.
Jules Carr-Chelman,
Present.
Morgan Cox,
Here.
Sophia Garcia,
Here.
Jessica Garvin,
Present.
Dan Hennessy,
Present.
Hannah Hobie,
Sorry.
Drew Moyer. You're fine. Drew Moyer,
Here.
Ryan Pearson, Grace Perucci, Tommy Reese. He's here, said something in the chat. Luis Rogel,
I'm here.
Jack Santee,
Here.
Kelly Stewart,
Here.
Ben Thomas,
Here.
Jacob Troutwine,
Here.
Rachel Veneman, and Alec Warren.
Here.
Okay, I have a count of 18 voting members.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We have 18 voting members, so that leaves majority at 10. Do we have any old business tonight? Seeing and hearing none, do we have any new business for discussion tonight?
I move to bring Senate Bill 2021-28 to the floor.
We've got a motion to bring Senate Bill 2021-28 proposed bylaws changes to the floor. Do we have a second?
I second that.
Hearing multiple seconds, all those in favor of bringing Senate Bill 2021-28 to the floor, please raise your hands at this time. All opposed? Seeing none opposed, we will go to Senate Bill 2021-28. Attorney General Gordon, you have the floor.
All right, so I'm having trouble scrolling. Okay, so I took out everything except for the part we changed. So it's not really changed as much as it is an addition. So we added to the section of members of the Senate at the bottom, head of commuter relations. And so we just tacked on a couple blanket statements to make them an equivalent to senators. So they have to have the same responsibilities and they're held to the same standards, both academic and behavioral. So they'll just serve in the same role as a senator, except their constituency is specifically commuter students. I yield my time for any questions.
Thank you, AG Gordon. Any points or motions?
Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, Senator Moyer.
Yeah, the only comment I wanted to make is that Mason and myself and Ben Thomas worked on this last Monday, I believe, either last Monday or Tuesday. And really the main focus was just to bring the head of community relations up to kind of the same level that we see our directors, seeing that they did not have a vote on Senate floor, meaning they did not have a vote for their allotted constituency, which would be commuters. So we just really, or the main reason that I had brought this up to Mason and that we worked on it this past week was just to ensure that they had a vote on Senate floor, so they were able to vote on behalf of their constituents.
Thank you, Senator Moyer. Any other points or comments at this time?
I move the previous question.
Hearing a motion, hearing a second, all those in favor of moving the previous question, please raise your hands at this time. All opposed? We've got a majority in favor of moving the previous question. We will now go into voting procedure on Senate Bill 2021-28. Please go ahead and vote.
Do we have 18 people here?
Yeah.
Okay. 1602.
By a vote of 16 to 0 to 2, Senate Bill 2021-28 has passed. Any further points or motions tonight?
Point of information.
Senator Carchelman?
Given the bill that we passed pretty recently about voting records, is it not protocol that we are voting verbally and recording which senators vote?
Thank you for your question, Senator Carchelman. No, that is only when a member makes a motion, which is then voted on by the entirety of the Senate, to do a vote by roll call or similar method, which would allow for us to call each and every individual person and record their name. Most votes, particularly those for non-contentious issues like this one, will be conducted using normal voting. Any further points or motions?
A motion to bring Senate Bill 2021-27 to the floor.
Hearing a motion to bring Senate Bill 2021-27 to the floor, do we have a second?
A second.
Hearing a second from Director Rogel, all those in favor of bringing Senate Bill 2021-27 to the floor, please raise your hands at this time. All opposed? Seeing none in opposition, we will go to Senate Bill 2021-27, proposed amendments to the Constitution. Attorney General Gordon, you have the floor.
Thank you. So there's a few more spots that were changed in the Constitution than there were in the bylaws. It was grammatical things. So when we do actually add head of community relations to the Senate, for the composition, we changed 20 to 21. And there was concerns about this disrupting the tie-breaking ability of the vice president, but I don't see that as an issue, seeing how we often don't have 20 members and there's been a lot of abstentions this year. So I feel that if there ever is a tie again, the vice president will certainly have the ability to break it. And then down here, we added one head of community relations as a separate sort of section than the class representatives and the directors, only specifically because class representatives represent a class, directors represent different constituencies, and head of community relations is not a director, nor are they a class representative. They represent their own sort of subsection of the student body. So are there any questions about this section? I yield my time to anybody who asks.
Thank you, AG Gordon. Any points or motions?
I move to previous question.
Hearing a motion, the previous question, do we have a second?
Second that.
Hearing a second, Director Cox, all those in favor of moving the previous question, please raise your hands at this time. All opposed? Seeing and hearing no opposition, we will move into voting procedure on Senate Bill 2021-27. Please go ahead and vote. By a vote of 17 to 0 to 1, Senate Bill 2021-27 is passed. Any further points or motions?
A motion to bring Senate Resolution 2021-22 to the floor.
Director Rogel has made a motion to bring Senate Resolution 2021-22 to the floor. Do we have a second?
I second that.
Hearing a second from Director Cox, all those in favor bring Senate Resolution 2021-22 and condemnation of attacks on Asian American communities to the floor, please raise your hands at this time. All opposed? Seeing none in opposition, we will go to Senator Trotwine. You have the floor.
Thank you, Speaker Jagels. So this is in response to some of the violence that we saw last week. And it's been overall, I would say, an extension of the violence that we've seen in response to the presumed myth, or I mean, not myth, but just sort of the attribution of COVID to the Asian American community and those sort of awful forms of bias and hate. And then the extension that we saw to these communities, particularly in Georgia and in San Francisco, against these communities, and just acknowledges the suffering of these communities and calls attention to UD's statement, but also reinforces and extends upon it. And with that, I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Troutwine. Any points or motions?
Point of information.
Director Rogel, go ahead.
Yeah, so like I like this resolution, but like the problem I have with it is that it's not very actionable for like SGA members. Like I this is such an important topic because Asian Americans have been like targeted for so long besides the past couple of weeks. And it's like just saying that it's bad and that we agree that like we shouldn't hate or like there shouldn't be any hate towards Asian groups is not enough. And that literally like it does something, but it is not anything of value. Everyone already does that already. What can we actually do? Like what trainings can we do? Well, how does our attendance look for AAA events? What do we do for Asian Pacific Islander Month? Like there's actual things that we can do or there's actual things as members that we can do that we're not doing. And I think like, I like what the resolution is pointing towards, but it's lacking the actual implication of helping out the Asian community. Like, yeah, it's good to put out a statement that like hate has no home here, and we want to protect our Asian like American students and anyone from Asian descent. But as SGA members, I think all of us have a responsibility of actually enacting on that and doing something. And I think that that's something that this is lacking. Like there has to be something that we can do, and that's something that like I would like to see on here. The only thing is like I have to think about what like if I were to amend it, right? Like what the amendment would look like. So like I definitely want to clarify that I love the direction this bill is pointing towards, but I really want to say something that like SGA members will do this, or SGA will put on these type of events, or like they will actually do something besides just acknowledging the suffering of many within this community and calls on UD students to engage with Asian Americans. Like that's nothing. It doesn't do anything. Like we can do so much more and we're not working towards our potential. And it's kind of disappointing.
Thank you, Director Rogel. Senator Troutwine, would you care to respond?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Director Rogel, for that. I would totally be in support of any amendment that would be made that would add that language to it and add those actionable steps to it. And any that you would add or that anyone would like to add would most definitely be a favorable amendment. And I yield my time.
Point of information.
Senator Brown.
I feel like I definitely agree with what Luis is saying. As to, I love the idea of this bill, but I think that there are so many different ways that we could address, the struggles that Asian American students face, not only just within this year, but just their existence on campus in general. I personally, my biggest thing is I think it needs to be longer. And I think that, some of the points that Louise brought up, could be fit in, yes, we acknowledge that what happened was terrible, but what can we do? We have an anti-racism group. How can we use our anti-racism group to advocate for Asian Americans? What can we do within SGA to make our to be more representative of their struggles and their the discrimination that they face on and off campus? I would personally say that this would be something to table, because I think that maybe that we were just trying to put something out, and I definitely get the idea of not wanting to wait too long to say something about it. But I think, to take a longer time to really craft our words and to say, okay, this is bad. What are we going to do about it? I think would be more convenient of our time and more what's the word I'm looking for? More beneficial for Asian American Pacific Islander students on campus. I don't know if anybody agrees with me on that, but that's what I would propose doing.
Point of information.
Director Rogel.
So like, what's it called? Because I know like the first thing that comes to mind is like to put out programming, right? Especially as the director of Campus Unity, this is something that I'm already planning on doing, right? But like, just because I do something, it's not fair to say that like SGA and like in total like does this or whatever, right? Like if I were to create an event, like I would actually want as much people there if you're available. And I know a lot of you are, right? Like I would actually want an SGA attendance there, whether it's like, obviously it wouldn't be everyone because that's impractical. Some of us have jobs, other clubs, organizations, right? Like that's obviously very like respectable. But a lot of us have free time. So it's like, there should be, I don't know, some type of, I don't want to say mandatory, but there needs to be some type of there needs to be like a dominant attendance in these type of cultural heritage month events besides just the director of Campus Unity and the people of color on like SGA. Right? Because like we cannot say that we stand for diversity and inclusion and then we don't take any actual actionable items that people can look back on and say, yep, like SGA like actually does this for students. And again, and like I'm really sorry if I phrase it this way, but I'm definitely not coming at Jacob because this is a great resolution and it's something that has to be put out. This is just something I was thinking about because there was a resolution that was passed in the past. And it was something like this where we just said like, this is bad, like we don't agree with it. But it's like, okay, yes, like to be honest, every time we put out something like this, it's something very obvious that no one should agree with. Like no one should agree that attacks against Asian American communities is a good thing, right? So this is a pretty obvious thing. I think like SGA should do more than just stating the obvious. What is it called? So then like with what Jada was saying about like tailoring the discussion to actually come up with actionable items, I would love throughout this week to meet with Jacob and actually think about things on what we can do for our Asian American students or anyone from like the Asian community and make it very attainable. So Asian students can say, wow, besides SGA just saying this is bad, they're actually doing this for us. I feel comfortable, going up to them with my problems because I know they're actually going to do something, right? So that's another thing too. But again, I want to make it really clear. I'm not coming at you, Jacob. I love this resolution. I just want to make it more attainable and like more action items focused.
Point of information.
Senator Carr-Chellman, go ahead.
So, I mean, I think this all makes a lot of sense to me. And the only thing that I think about when I'm hearing this is that publicly, I think it's important that SGA makes formal statements like this about issues and events and contemporary problems. But I think it's also very important that we create actionable bills. So like what my mind goes to is like, okay, this bill, obviously it's not enough as far as action goes, but we need to recognize as an organization that this is a problem and that we don't agree with it. So for me, I think a good way to pass this resolution, make a public statement while also resolving to do more in the future that is real action, like things that we'll actually do to prevent this kind of discrimination on campus, is maybe to add another operative clause that says we resolve to consider a detailed and actionable resolution on this topic within the next 2 weeks. Because just the only thing I worry about is someone noticing or pointing out that we haven't spoken out on this topic and said we don't agree that what's happened is a problem, right? So we cover our bases and then we resolve to do something that is significant and detailed and actionable in the next 2 weeks. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Carr-Chellman. Senator Trotwine, would you like to respond to the previous comments?
Yes. To all the points, yes, I'm in support of all of that. I would move to table the bill in order to accommodate those changes to the legislation itself. I yield my time.
Hearing a motion to table the bill, do we have a second?
I second that motion.
Hearing a second from Senator Brown, all those in favor of tabling Senate Resolution 2021-22, please raise your hands at this time. All opposed? Seeing none raising hands in opposition, Senate Resolution 2021-22 in consideration of attacks against Asian American communities is tabled. Any further points or motions?
I move to adjourn this meeting.
That would not be favorable, Senator, as we still have one more bill up for consideration.
I object because it's not brought to the floor.
I move to bring Senate Resolution 2021-23 to the floor.
Thank you, Senator Brown. We've got a motion to bring Senate Resolution 2021-23 to the floor. Do we have a second? Seeing a second from Senator Karchelman, all those in favor of bringing Senate Resolution 2021-23 to the floor, please raise your hands at this time. All those opposed? Seeing majority in favor, we will go to Senate Resolution 2021-23. Senator Troutwine, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. So this legislation, as talked about earlier, is regarding smoking on campus. And the thing about it is it's been brought to my attention by several constituents that the smoking benches, or I'm not exactly sure of the correct nomenclature to use in regards to these, but that there's some real issues of their efficacy. There's been a lot of reports, and this is not just this year, but it seems that it's almost been even exacerbated this year in a way, that there's been individuals who have been smoking outside of these booths, if you will, and even just in general around the vicinity of these booths, and that sort of their positioning makes it very difficult for some students to return to their dorms or to their housing. And while I hadn't considered more of the issues of diversity that may surround this issue, what I would say overall is that I'm not trying to necessarily call out the administration for or call out any particular like group or anything in terms of this. Really, the question that I'm posing here is less about that and more as to call on consideration of the issue, because it seems that the efficacy of these booths is in question, from what I've been understanding, from what I've seen, from what I've heard, from what I've been told by others. And it just, to me, it's an important issue. We are very acutely aware of the health risks posed by things like COVID and sort of the spreaders of that. But to the extent that this is also equally a health risk and a health hazard, and something that we've been acutely aware of the risks of for over a generation at this point, seeing that we have peer institutions that have already made these sorts of changes, I would just call on us to sort of be those advocates for a healthier campus and sort of put this more to the administration as a question and calling on them to consider this in terms of this severe risk to our health and the health of our community. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Troutwine. Do we have any points or motions?
Point of information.
Senator Karchelman.
Sorry, a lot of notifications going off around here. So yeah, I personally, in my opinion, first of all, I don't think that anything that the Senate resolves is meant to be a question. It's meant to be a definitive statement, I think. And no, nothing wrong with the idea. It's a very good idea. And this is a really important bill, but we don't pass resolutions to ask a question. We pass resolutions to say, here's what we want and here's what we need as a student body. That's just a little bit of, sort of what I was thinking as you were talking there a little bit, Jacob, which this bill's great. But I'm also curious as to how we plan, or just the fourth operative clause. I am a little confused as to how we plan to have the administration restricting the use of tobacco in places that aren't their property. So, I mean, when I was reading this bill, I just thought, like, that's not land, or, that's not their jurisdiction. They don't have a right to do anything to that space. And so I just wanted to know if there's something I don't know, or what, how do they govern that area? I yield my time.
Yeah.
Senator Trotwine, go ahead.
So to that point, I don't know what happened here, but yeah, it should. Here, I don't know if I'm changing it. It should have said excluding public property outside that of the university. I don't know what happened there. I can't edit, I don't think. Maybe I can. I guess I can. Okay. But yeah, it would, I mean, obviously that cannot be enforced in those areas, but yeah. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Trotwine. Any further points or motions?
I,
Point of information.
Senator Brown.
So like, are we like proposing in this bill that like we should become a smoke-free campus? Like, is that like the main goal of this bill? I'm just like a little confused, like, why? I'm not saying that like it's bad. I'm just a little confused, like, like what's the end goal of like this legislation? Like, are we trying to say like we should be a smoke-free campus, or are we just like get rid of these? Like, what's like the end goal?
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Trotwine, would you like to respond?
I think you articulated it pretty well. I think that we should be a smoke-free campus, and I think that I am not alone in that belief by a lot of the students on this campus. I yield my time.
Information.
Senator Director Ogle.
Like what's called, I have two things. So like the first thing is like, one thing that kind of just comes to mind is like, if there isn't designated smoking spots, I feel like people are just gonna end up smoking like wherever is just convenient for them. Like they're not gonna wanna, I don't know, like let's say like you live in VWK, right? Like you're not gonna walk all the way to Stewart or all the way to Irving to smoke. You're just probably gonna go outside your dorm now and smoke there. And then the other thing too is like, I know that you referenced other schools, and like Chris Chris said it, like how a lot of the people who do smoke are international students. So like, you know what the international population is at the other schools and how it compares to ours?
Senator Trotwine, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would. So to the first point of that, I wouldn't see that as, first off, I think a lot of the question also came with how this can be enforced. And with smoking booths, it honestly creates a situation, and from what I understand, from what I've seen, from what I've heard, it makes more sense to remove it in totality, because there's a lot of times in which an individual could be smoking outside of the area of a booth, and simply if public safety begins to walk by, or individuals from the UD police force, they would just return to the smoking booth and face no consequence. And like to that effect, also, obviously, secondhand smoke does not follow the rules of simple 6 foot by 3 foot area. It extends far beyond that and extends to the area of the main path and a lot of the paths on campus. So I would almost even argue that these smoking booths are in fact a little bit of a misnomer. They don't really actually retain the smoke, if you will. But to the greater point of a lot of these peer institutions, yes, they do have sizable international student populations. Wright State, OSU, they do have a sizable population of international students. Sinclair, not so much, although they still would likely have some. But it's just overall, the idea is as we move to become a healthier society, I struggle to understand too at the same time why we retain this idea that these smoking booths somehow prevent widespread smoking on campus, prevent these sort of high risk actions that cause secondhand smoke inhalation and things of that nature. At any rate, I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Trotwine. Any further points or motions at this time?
With point of information.
Senator Thomas.
So I live in Stewart, and I have to wake up early in the morning sometimes for RASI. So when I'm walking back up the hill, I see people in the booth, and oftentimes there are workers and other people that use the booths. So if we pass this resolution, would that be something that we couldn't do because it extends beyond like the school because other people use it too? I yield my time.
Senator Trotwine.
I'm not entirely sure to what you're referring to. Do you just mean in general that like workers, like campus workers, or are you talking about like workers like the bus drivers, or what are you referring? Sorry.
Just an observation I made. I probably don't specifically know who's using it, but it seemed like it was just people, not students. Yeah.
Go ahead, Senator Trotwine.
Yes. So, I would agree with with what Chris Fishball put in the chat. I would assume that is what it would go to, and I think that would be favorable, given just the totality of the circumstances. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Trotwine. Any points or motions?
Point of information.
Senator Moyer.
Senator Trotwine, have you reached out to anybody within the administration expressing your concerns? I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Moyer. Senator Trotwine.
To that point, this would also be sort of that first introductory step in maybe getting administration to appear before Senate meetings or someone who can speak to this issue more favorably. This, like I said, this isn't necessarily to. I mean, this I'm looking to see also at the same time if this is a favorable resolution, because I mean this is not actionable. I purposely wrote this not as a bill but a resolution to sort of be able to get those introductory steps to engaging with the administration in terms of this issue. I believe that is sort of the point of resolutions for the most part, and to that end, this doesn't necessarily necessitate action by the university or necessitate action on behalf of SGA. This is merely asking for additional information. This is in general an inquiry more so than an action. With that, I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Trotwine. Do we have any further points or motions?
Point of information.
Senator Moyer.
I just feel like if we're passing this, when you said it's not a part of SGA, it definitely would be and would have all of our names on it. I think it's, in my opinion, it's not something that I'm in favor of and will be voting no, as we have not reached out in any consultation. And if we wanted the administration to come and talk to us, they're more than willing to always come and speak to us if we reached out, instead of passing legislation before reaching out to them. Therefore, I'm not in favor. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Moyer. Any further points or motions?
I move the previous question.
Hearing a motion, the previous question from Director Rogel, do we have a second?
I second that.
Hearing a second from Senator Brown, all those in favor of moving the previous question, please raise your hands at this time. All those opposed. Seeing none in opposition, we will go into voting procedure on Senate Resolution 2021-23, Commitment to a Healthy and Respectable Campus. By a vote of 5 to 10 to 3, Senate Resolution 2021-23 has failed. Any further points or motions at this time?
I move to adjourn this meeting.
Hearing motions to adjourn from multiple people, do we have a second?
I second that.
Hearing a second, all those in favor of adjourning, please raise your hands at this time. All opposed? Seeing none, Senate floor is hereby adjourned. Thank you all very much. Have a nice rest of your afternoon.